Hello. You guys are like, who the heck are you? It's okay, I'll tell you. All will be revealed. Welcome to WBUR CitySpace. Has anybody, is this anybody's first time here? Holy guacamole, this is great. Welcome. I hope this will not be your last. Let's make it that way. My name is Amory Sievertson. I co-host a podcast called Endless Thread that we make here at WBUR. Zero Endless Thread fans. Perfect. Perfect. We're off to a great start. I co-host that show with Ben Brock Johnson. He is currently eating all of the tacos in Austin, Texas, so he is not here right now. But you guys are going to have so much more fun than he's having because you're going to hear all about failure. So this is going to be a great night. Are you excited for Freakonomics? I am too. Who here is a Freakonomics listener on the good old terrestrial radio? Lovely. Who listens to the podcast? Great. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Endless Thread just as a warm-up, okay? I think you're going to like it. I think you're going to like Endless Thread if you like Freakonomics. This is a show about the blurred lines between our online selves and lives and our offline selves and lives. Yeah, ooh, I like that. I heard some oohs, okay? We frequently do end up touching on some economic stories. We were all over the Wall Street Bets GameStop story from a couple years ago, of course. We did a whole series about crypto just last year. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we did an episode about an economic concept that I think some of you may have heard of before, but I'm going to take you on a little journey. So it starts with a the mother of a very good friend of mine. Her name is Melanie. And Melanie, for a little context, she's the first person I ever knew who had a label maker. Yes, you know exactly what I mean, right? Melanie labels everything. She labels her cabinet, she labels her jars. She lives alone. She knows where everything is. But she makes heavy use of this label maker. So that's who Melanie is. She's detail-oriented, she knows what she likes, and she sticks with it. So at the beginning of the pandemic, she couldn't find her beloved brand of toilet paper. Melanie loves Charmin Ultra Soft. This is not sponsored content. She just loves Charmin. Although if Charmin wants to sponsor any of our podcasts, including Endless Thread, Charmin reps out there, spread the word. She loves Charmin Ultra Soft. So at the beginning of the pandemic, when we couldn't find any toilet paper, she can't find her Charmin Ultra Soft at Costco, which is where she usually goes. She buys it in bulk. So she does end up finding Charmin Ultra Soft at her local grocery store called Ralph's. She lives out on the West Coast. And she brings home a pack of this new toilet paper from Ralph's. And she notices that the Ralph's Charmin Ultra Soft is a little bit different.
Normally, when I get down to the very end, I put a new roll on and leave the little, the little bit that's still enough there. So when I took the new roll and put it on, and I put the little bit that was left on the old roll, it was noticeably not as wide.
Noticeably not as wide. But the old TP and the new TP were both Charmin Ultra Soft. So Melanie's like, what gives?
So then, of course, I'm curious. So I took a sheet off of each one and matched them up together and discovered that side to side, it was half an inch shorter, and then the length of the sheet itself was a 1/4 inch shorter than the previous roll.
Scandal. So each square of the new pack of Charmin Ultra Soft is a little bit smaller. And my friends, thanks to Melanie's detail-oriented ways, I have proof of this. This was a picture that my friend texted to me and said, my mom is officially losing her mind in the pandemic. She is measuring squares of toilet paper. Okay, so yes, new roll, square, old roll, square, different sizes. Now, this might not seem like a huge deal, but Melanie's like, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to change my technique in the bathroom.
My daughter rolled her eyes when I told her that. I said, I have to learn some new skills.
I'm sure my friend is just going to love that I've now played this for 250 strangers. Her mom's changing technique in the bathroom. But the thing is, it isn't just toilet paper squares that are shrinking. In fact, BJ Novak, all the way back in 2007, Ryan from The Office, in case you're like, who is that again? He made a point of this in an appearance on Late Night with Conan O'Brien all the way back in 2007.
I buy my Cadbury eggs this year. They feel smaller than they used to be. And I ask my friends, okay, a couple people noticed that, right?
Yeah.
I ask my friends, have they got smaller? My friends say, no, you've just gotten bigger. I'm like,
Right.
oh. Well, I buy them every year. I don't think I got bigger last year.
Yeah.
But I said, okay. Then I went on the Cadbury site just to check. Right
The
on
Cadbury
the main
website,
Cadbury
yeah.
website, you go to the main Cadbury website, it says on the front page, no, they have not gotten smaller, you've gotten bigger. So something is up.
That's weird that no one asked. They're volunteering it. That's very strange.
Doesn't that makes you a little suspicious that they brought it up so easily, or they've heard so many complaints.
Yes, that's what I think. They've
so
heard
I'm thinking,
complaints.
okay, I have stashed away Easter candy for years, for the course of the year. I must have somewhere. I must have a Cadbury egg from previous year. I look through all the cabinets in my house. I find a Cadbury cream egg from a couple years ago, and I brought it.
This is one.
This is this year's Cadbury egg, not the mini egg, not the mini cream egg. This is this year's egg.
Yes.
This is the egg from a couple
Oh,
years
wow.
ago.
Look at that.
Judge for yourself, America.
Okay, so does anyone know the popular term for this economic concept? The idea that products are getting smaller? You guys know. Shrinkflation. Yes, this is called shrinkflation. So Endless Thread made a whole episode about shrinkflation, and we spoke to the economist credited with coining that term. Pippa Malmgren is her name.
You go to open your breakfast cereal, and there's like less cereal inside all the time. That is a signal that costs are going up, and the manufacturers are trying to protect their profitability, and there has to be a name for that. So I thought about it, and I thought, shrinkflation.
We also spoke to a guy here in Massachusetts, Edgar Dworsky, who has made it his mission to shine a light on shrinkflation. And he's done that by literally collecting products year over year to show the shrinkage.
I tend to go to grand openings of supermarkets, and I went to, excuse me, some people go to the movies, on debut night. I go to supermarkets when they open.
No
Next
judgment.
one of
No
those,
judgment.
Edgar, we're coming with you.
Yeah.
Good.
Let us know. We'll be there.
So I went to the grand opening of Wegmans, and this was, I think it may have even been the first one in the state, some years ago. And Nabisco had just downsized Oreos. And there happened to be a Nabisco salesperson or something like that in the cookie aisle. And I was complaining to him, look at this, you've downsized the Oreos. Why did you do that? And he said, well, look at the bright side. Each one's a little bit smaller. You're saving calories.
No, you're just going to eat more cookies, am I right? So, of course, I had to get justice for Melanie as well. I had to call up Charmin and talk to one of their reps. And the rep told me that Charmin is constantly innovating to add more premium softness fibers to their ultra soft line, and they added a cloud design on the actual TP squares to improve absorbency.
So sometimes to allow for more room for those innovations to take place, we do down count our sheet size. However, that's keeping in mind that we're allowing consumers to do a lot more with less paper, so it's almost like you're getting more with less, essentially, so it's a little bit more bang for your buck in that sense.
More bang for your buck, guys, no problem. So really, it's Melanie's fault for not noticing the new absorbent clouds and the additional premium softness fibers. How did she miss it? I'm just kidding, of course. Shrinkflation is real, and if you didn't know it, now you know it. And the bottom line from everyone that we spoke to, except for the Charmin rep, is that you just have to pay attention to what you're getting for what you're paying, especially if you're a brand or a product loyalist like Melanie is. So that's just a little snippet of the Endless Thread Shrinkflation episode. I hope it gave you a taste of the fun that we have on that show. And now I have an assignment for each and every one of you, because I know a lot of you are podcast listeners. Do me a favor right now, take out your phones, go to your podcast apps. There's an incentive, a public radio inspired incentive, I promise. Find Endless Thread. The logo looks like this. Yeah, it looks like that. Subscribe, follow, do whatever your app wants you to do. And then at the end of the night, I want you to find this lovely woman over there, Candace. Candace, give us a nice little wave. Yes, Candace. I want you to find Candace, show her that you have subscribed or followed Endless Thread, and we will give you some of the coin of the public radio realm, a tote bag, which we would never, ever shrink on you. They're only getting bigger. So thank you so much for being here. And now, without further ado, of course, please welcome the host of Freakonomics, Stephen Dubner.
Thank you. That was great. That was awesome. That was real good. Thank you. She seems. Hi. Can you hear me here? Hello. Yeah. You seem surprised that I'm actually here. You thought they were.
It was a little. The wording was a little concerning.
Oh, I see. Okay. So nice to see you all. Hi. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. We don't do this kind of stuff very often, so it's nice to see that there are real people who are on the other end of the podcast. I'm really grateful to your great radio station here, WBUR. I'm so grateful. We can clap for them a lot. It is a great station, and we are really, really privileged to be on the air. And, you know, we are a podcast, but we're also a radio show. It's essentially the same material. We re-edit it every week. Sometimes we add, subtract, we bleep more. But it's especially for us to be on the air in Boston is incredibly important because so many of the people who are on our show are academics who are in Boston, and for them not to be able to hear their show on the air here was tragic for us. So I'm delighted to be on the air here. I thank you so much for coming out. It's such a crappy, I guess it's not a crappy night. It's just it's November. It gets dark early. But it's it gets so it's really cheerful to be with you all here. I will confess I'm a shy person. I don't seek out this kind of thing. I'm not very good at it. I'm not, how Oprah will wander around and look so natural here. This is the least favorite thing in the world for me to do. But I also love it because we make our show sort of in a vacuum. And so to just be with people who care and listen to it is really fantastic. And to get real feedback if something works or doesn't work, that's great. And, I assume many of you listen to Freakonomics Radio. Raise your hand if you do. Okay, right. So that makes sense. Why would you be here otherwise? But let me just say that what's going to happen here tonight bears very little resemblance to what happens when we make our show. So I'll explain very briefly how we make our show. It is long and boring. As a kid, I grew up in upstate New York, not super far from, far across the state. It's a long state, as you know. And we made maple syrup, among other things. Has anybody here made maple syrup? My condolences to all of you. It is a long and onerous process where you drive around on a tractor or walk with these buckets and nail them into maple trees with a spout, and it fills up with sap, which is like sweet water. Then you dump that into a big barrel and bring it back somewhere, and then you boil it down slowly over a fire for like 1,000,000 hours, and it's like gallons and gallons, and then you get this much maple syrup. And you're like, couldn't we have just bought that? And so the way we make our show is kind of like maple syrup. We have an idea, we do research, we try to find people who will be good to talk about it, people who have legitimate research that is interesting and true, try to make sure they're good at talking. We interview them, usually for like 1 to 2 hours each. Often there are many of them. Then we have like 5 to 10 to 15 hours of tape that we have transcribed. And then we have transcripts that we then turn into a script. And then we edit and mix and mix and mix. And then it turns into a podcast of like 40 or 50 minutes. You don't want to come and watch us do that. That would be really, really boring. So what we're doing tonight is hopefully a much more fun and accessible version with some fantastic guests. Now, this show tonight, we did one like it in New York, but this will probably be quite different. This isn't something that's rehearsed or written even, but it is drawn from this 4-part series we released recently on failure. which I'm guessing many of you have listened to, or at least part of it. And it was really inspired by my personal notion, but a lot of interesting data around the topic too, that we screw up failure in that we all fail all the time. Everybody fails all the time. I happen to like sports a lot. I realize one reason I like it is because failure is just par for the course, and they integrate it into their process. I feel that many of the rest of us, we don't have a healthy process in which to integrate failure, to acknowledge it, to learn from it, to even celebrate it, as one of our guests has acknowledged. And I think we need to change it, because if you just hide it and feel shame from it, it's not productive. On the other hand, you don't want to wallow in it. So what we're trying to do tonight is we've invited two of what I feel were the best guests from this 4-part series. Don't tell them, but they also happen to be two of the ones that lived in Boston, okay? And they will help me, really, they'll not help me. They will do the good talking about failure, different ways to think about it, more productive ways to think about it, ways to deal with the pain and the shame and so on. We're going to do that. We're going to invite some of you who have, you may have noticed there was a production member of our Freakonomics Radio team who was haranguing you when you came in with index cards. If you filled one of those out, you may be chosen to come up and share your failure story. And I hope it will be an entertaining and illuminating and engaging hour or so. And I really, really thank you again so much for coming out tonight. So let's welcome our two guests, Amy Edmondson and Gary Klein. Would you both come on up? All right. This is where it starts to get good. Amy, Gary, thank you so much for being here. You both have pretty impressive ideas, resumes, and so on, books written. Amy, let me ask you to first introduce yourself, and if you leave out anything exciting, I'll fill it in.
Boy, that's a tough one. My name is Amy Edmondson. I'm a faculty member about 1.5 miles from here at Harvard Business School.
Okay, you've written some books.
A few, yep.
You've got a book out just recently on the topic of failure.
I do. So that brand new book, which is out there, at least I saw it on the way in.
You'll be signing them after,
I'll be
correct?
signing them after. Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well.
Yeah. And is it scientific?
I think so.
Give me a devil's advocate argument for 1 second. What is there about failing well that we would like to know a lot more about, but we can't yet because it's not as testable as you might like?
Well, I mean, there's so much. This is the science of failing well, to me, primarily is about separating the good failure from the bad failure, and then following the knowledge we have for how best to prevent the bad failures, and the knowledge we have for how to experiment thoughtfully and occasionally, or often, encounter the good kind.
Of all the things in those sentences that were interesting to me, separating the good and bad failures, I think, is so key. I just think it's something that unless someone tells you, you don't.
Oh, that's at the heart of it. So I was inspired to write this book by all the happy talk about failure.
Yeah.
Right? Things like this,
Yeah,
how to succeed at failing. Silicon Valley, fail fast, break things, all that. It's like, okay, that's fine under certain conditions only.
Yeah.
And truthfully, there are many situations in which you actually want to succeed and should and can.
Yeah. I should say our graphic artist is kind of a, what's a kind word for it? Very upbeat, right?
Cheerful.
Cheerful, yeah, maybe to a fault. Okay, so would it be fair to say, probably not, but to what degree would you say that your scientific pursuit of failure is a forensic pursuit after the fact?
Oh, it's usually forensic.
Okay, right. So after things have hit the fan, okay, that's a good spot for you. So that brings us to Gary Klein, who, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think of you as on the other end of the failure, perhaps before the failure, and perhaps even preventing the failure. So introduce yourself and tell us if that prevention is the proper mode in which to think of you.
That's fair enough.
Okay.
The technique that I developed in the late 80s was called the pre-mortem. And it's a simple technique. You've all heard of a post-mortem. A post-mortem in a hospital, patient dies, and they do an autopsy, and the physicians find out why the patient died, which is important. So they learn from that failure, and they can tell the family, and the family is happy to find out. Not happy, but they're relieved to find out what happened. And if something is discovered, they communicate it to the community. Community benefits. Everybody benefits. Except the patient, because the patient died.
Can I ask a naive question? Is it how definitive is a typical medical postmortem?
My understanding is it's reasonably clear.
Yeah.
It's not always foolproof. They're not entirely sure what it was. Often there'll be multiple organ failures, so it gets complicated. So it's not a simple story.
Okay, so the downside of the postmortem is that none of us can talk about it after the fact.
Right.
But with a premortem, so maybe you could just tell the story briefly of how the premortem idea happened.
So I had a company, I started it in 1977, and we did a variety of projects. We're a research and development company. It was called Klein Associates. And most of our projects did well. Not all of them. Some of them did poorly. And we would do an after-action review to see what went wrong.
That's a phrase that comes from the military, or they adopted it? After-action review.
That's a military term.
Okay.
And so we would do that. But it was sort of too late because the project had gone wrong. So I said, why don't we do this at the beginning, and we'll call it a premortem and try to anticipate what might go wrong. And the way the premortem works is we have the team they're so enthusiastic, getting ready to start a new project. Everybody is...
they're enthusiastic about the project, not about the premortem.
Not about the premortem.
Okay.
Enthusiastic about the project. And then at the very end, after we've discussed the project, how it's going to go, what the roles are for various people, then we say, now we've reserved about 20 minutes, and we're going to do a different kind of exercise. And everybody relax. And I'm usually leading it, and I say, I'm looking into a crystal ball. It's an infallible crystal ball. And, crystal ball is showing me that this project has failed. It's now 6 months from now, maybe a year, unclear what the time frame is, but it's totally clear the project has failed.
I like your dramatic... do you have some bagpipe music playing in the background there?
That's to put them in the mood.
Yeah, no, I'm in the mood.
Make sure
yeah.
that we sell it,
Right.
that this isn't an intellectual exercise. This is an emotional exercise.
Ah. Huh.
Okay?
Okay.
And everybody absorbs that. And then I say, now we're all smart people here. Everybody has a pad of paper and pen. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Write down all the reasons that you can think of why this project failed. And they write like crazy. And then after 2 minutes, I say, stop. And then I go around the room and I start with the project leader, because project leader, he or she has to set the tone. And I say, what's the top item on your list? And they just tell us the top item.
Give it for instance.
For instance, we've got a new program going on, and I've got some key people who are going to be working on it. They have other projects they're working on. I'm not sure they're going to be able to come through when I need them to come through.
Okay, so obvious question, or for me at least, is why would this not have come up in the planning?
Because people want to be happy and people want to be harmonious.
Not Amy. Amy would have been. Amy would have been in there. I don't know.
I have an idea. I have an idea.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you start with the leader, I see, to set the tone, and then you go around the room.
And everybody says one item at a time, because we don't want people speaking too long. And then we record it, and usually we'll go around a second time, and that's as much as it takes. And we have a list of items, and people look at it and realize these are pretty scary items, and it's really helpful.
And the idea is it now gives you time to address them before you invest the extra time and money. You can reset the situation. Yes,
we can learn from it. We can reset it. people were complaining to me that this was too discouraging because they were usually overconfident. So this is a remedy for overconfidence.
Yeah.
And so we added another part at the end, looking at the list of items we've generated. Everybody has another 2 minutes. Write down what can you do that will prevent some of these items from occurring.
Smart.
And so we end on a higher note.
Smart. Now, how often do you shut down? Is a project shut down when they go through the premortem?
We haven't had projects shut down, but my friend Bryce Hoffman, who uses premortems, has had a project shut down. And people say the odds are too great. There are too many items on the list. I'm not sure we can handle it.
I'm curious, Amy, as a forensic failure expert, you've known about the premortem. We should say is very, very famous. It's beloved and famous and practiced quite a lot. I'm just curious, Amy, as someone who looks at failures typically from the after side, what you think of this idea?
Well, I love the premortem because I actually think of it as a fairly cheerful exercise because no, I know that doesn't sound right, but it's an opportunity to show off your creativity, right? To sort of say, "Ooh, I've got one. It could be this. It could be that," and I think it's important that it's not just for projects or initiatives, it's for decisions. And you're an expert in decisions, right? So I can't tell you how many decisions I've studied that if they had only, in companies and in government agencies and elsewhere, if they'd only had a premortem, they would have made a different decision.
Yes.
So it's not just do we shut the project down or not shut the project down, it's do we acquire that company, do we hire that person? And if you stop to think about something maybe very obvious or at least one person knows but others don't, and get that out in the open, you can make a better decision.
Yeah. I feel we should say you're both organizational psychologists by training. Is that correct? Not quite?
I'm a cognitive psychologist.
Cognitive psychologist, yeah. Amy, you're...
I'm organizational.
Okay. So I do think it's important to note that because, I think about other... we've gotten a lot of email response and other response to this series, which is, I have to say, making stuff is fun, but having it land is really fun. Parts of it are tricky because there's so much... I think the French call it l'esprit d'escalier, the spirit of the staircase, the thing that you remember you should have said when you're on your way up to your bedroom in the evening that you should have said at the party when that person insulted you, like, oh, I could have told them. But people point out these retrospectively really obvious pieces of an episode or a series. And in this case, there were a lot, part because it was a 4-part series. A lot of people pointed out that we really didn't get into religion and the role of religion and how religion and philosophy have a way of dealing with failure because failure has been a component of humankind forever. And I regret that we didn't include that. But then quite a few people wrote to us about a process or I don't know exactly what it's called, a method called FMEA. Are either of you familiar with this? Failure
mode event analysis?
Say it again?
Failure mode event analysis.
Failure mode event analysis. Yeah. Can you talk about it a little and how it maybe compares to maybe what either of you do?
It's really an after-action review, and it's often used. I studied a hospital in the Midwest, Children's Minnesota, where they instituted the FMEA after an adverse event of some kind had happened for a patient, not always a fatal one, but just something went wrong that shouldn't have happened. And the idea was to bring everyone together who had any connection to these events at all. And it's like the proverbial blind man and the elephant, where each person just describes what they saw, what happened from their perspective. And by the time they have each described what they saw happening, everyone has a fuller picture. And people are quite surprised by things they didn't know were happening. And once they put it all together,
so I see the value of that for sure. Right. I mean, you want to diagnose it. On the other hand, I'm just curious whether it's that version or whether it's the work that you do. How does one think about and manage the blaming part of that? Because I could imagine it gets a little bit competitive, yes?
One of the ways to manage the blaming part is through the language, through the questions you ask. And the most important question is what happened, not who did it.
Okay, yeah. But then when you ask me what happened, I'll say, well, Zach messed up.
Always.
No, because...
And then I'll give you some gentle feedback to get down what I'll call the ladder of inference down to the actual what happened.
Okay. So, Amy, if you would, Amy has written about what she calls a spectrum of causes of failure. And honestly, this was one of the things that when I saw that made me want to do this series, because I was inspired to do the series by just the way I'd thought about failure in my life. And I'd felt like I told one story in the series that I don't need to go into here, but as a writer, when I was in graduate school, I felt I could learn more from bad writing than from good writing. Emulating excellence is kind of a typical pattern, but I find it really hard. You know, the people who are excellent, they've done a million things I'm never going to be able to do or know about. Whereas if I can identify something bad, I can know, that's something to watch out for in myself. When I saw your spectrum, I thought, man, that's awesome, because it is a spectrum and it identifies different components of failure. And I think any of us can look at our own failure and find the one or two or maybe more on the spectrum that really not just describes it, but then you can think about it for the next time. So could you walk us through the 6 causes in your spectrum, please?
And I'll say that the 6 causes range from, on one end, truly blameworthy, and get all the way over on the other end to truly praiseworthy. And the actual purpose of this spectrum is what you were saying before, which is that we jump to blameworthy. Something went wrong. Oh, it's Zach's fault, right? So that's just that's human.
By the way, Zach is a real person.
Yeah, Zach is spectacular.
And his name is Zach Lipinski, and he produced the series on failure. And he's here tonight, and he is awesome.
Anything that went well was probably Zach.
That's exactly right. The failures were all me. So Zach Lipinski, thank you, Zach. I think he's maybe in the booth. Okay.
So the idea is, because we naturally, both cognitively and socially and organizations, will jump to the who did it, the blame game. I thought that this would be a useful thought exercise, right? So the spectrum on the blameworthy end, the first potential cause. Let's imagine something goes badly wrong in your organization. First potential cause is sabotage. Someone woke up that morning and thought, how can I break this, right? And they came in, they wreaked havoc. That's that. Next is...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I am an interrupter. This is why our show is ridiculous, because this is why the interviews take 3 hours, because I'm doing this all the time. Most of the failures that you and I talked about for the show and what you're talking about tonight are institutional or organizational failures, which makes sense. That's what you do.
Yep.
But when I hear sabotage, I think, I hear people say in their personal lives, I really sabotage.
Absolutely. So this applies to your personal life as well. This applies to just, you said we fail every day. I mean, it could be just something little. You're late for an important meeting.
Yeah.
What caused it? Well, you deliberately set your alarm late to make sure that you couldn't make it on time.
And then there's some psychological trail to follow.
Right. We could dig into that further.
Right.
So sabotage, inattention. You just weren't paying attention. You mailed it in. You're doing it in your sleep, or maybe you're just too tired and you fell asleep. After that is inability. Right? You currently lack, or someone lacks the ability to actually execute the way it's supposed to be done. And then comes task challenge. Like the thing that needs to be done is simply too challenging to reliably execute on it perfectly every time. Like, really serious sports accomplishments, let's say. And then comes uncertainty. Like you're doing something maybe in a scientific setting where really nobody quite knows how to get the result you're trying to get. And then all the way over on the right is a thoughtful experiment, right? A good hypothesis. You go ahead, you run the experiment, and guess what? You were wrong.
Right. As you were giving that spectrum, I've heard it before, and even though we made the series, for some reason, the way you did it right now, maybe because it was kind of quick and you just defined them so beautifully, I felt the spectrum going from blameworthy to praiseworthy. Every stage is a little bit less, causal of the person.
A little bit less blame.
A little bit less blame. Gary, I'm just curious, were you familiar with the spectrum?
Not before I encountered Emmy's work.
Yeah, and now, and be honest, pretend she's not here. Give me a nice peek of it.
I think it's a wonderful tool. I think it's a very good organizational conceptual structure.
Yeah.
I like it. I wonder what was going through my mind was what we talked about in the green room. Also to look at organizations that are more open to failure and are it's become part of the routine versus organizational situations where people are less likely to do it, where it may be less productive. So that might be a dimension to think about.
When you think about, either of you, when you think about the type of organizations that are and are not open to failure, can you just name a couple from both sides?
For me, an NFL team looking at game film
Right.
and trying to find out what went wrong, where did those plays fail, and how did we mess up there. On the other end, you would have organizations that make decisions that don't turn out to be failures for a year or two. Yeah. And by that time, people have left, and there seems to be little point in examining why they failed.
Yeah, those are good examples. Amy, do you have?
Well, a context in which failure is not only likely, but you really have to learn to accept it, embrace it, learn from it as a scientific laboratory.
Yeah, yeah.
And in a context in which we don't want failures to happen at all,
Yeah.
is passenger air travel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. To me, that is an amazing story of success, of how the airline industry decided that 0 was the only number of failure acceptable. It wasn't easy, it took a while. But, Gary, when you give the NFL example, that has the virtue of being observable and measurable, right? Many of the decisions that most of us make, even in our personal lives, do I want to have a relationship with this person? Do I want to apply for this job? Not only are they not as measurable and observable, but it's a long time frame. We can't really measure the counterfactual. When you're watching the NFL film, you've got the counterfactual right there. So what advice do you have, either of you, again, for putting the label on the thing when it's more abstract?
Okay, so it's obviously going to be much more difficult in these environments, and that's why people are less enthusiastic about exploring the failure, because it's going to be less successful, and there's going to be lower chance of making discoveries. So I think that's a factor operating against it. But let's go back to your issue about aviation, where they have a system that examines failures, but also near misses. I mean, they're really very, very careful about it, and they have permission to do this where they're free of the fear of litigation, as opposed to, say, hospitals that are much more careful because you have litigation fears.
One of the emails we got after the series came today. It was very interesting. I'm curious to know what you both think of it. It was from a very well-credentialed person whose credentials I can't recall all of them right now. He was a state health commissioner in maybe New York State. He was also part of the team that wrote the original IOM, Institute of Medicine, report in 1999 or 8 called "To Err is Human." And there was a predecessor report, and he says that this was kind of the beginning of the patient safety movement in the U.S. It really tried to put a number on it. And he wrote to say that one thing that he really is worried about is that there'd been a lot of movement made in the field of patient safety over the past 20, 30 years, but that with the consolidation that's happening in the healthcare industry now, especially driven by private equity firms, it's just going away. It's just literally become not a priority anymore because there are different priorities which are about throughput and efficacy. So do you have any advice for someone that's in the field who really wants to keep pushing against that kind of failure, but the institutional and financial pressure are going against them?
So I have two friends who have each gotten positions as the hospital officer and as advocate for patient safety to reduce errors and reduce damage. And they both resigned after 6 months.
Oh boy.
And they felt that they had been betrayed, because when they were being interviewed, they were told the hospital is really committed to patient safety. And then when they got into the hospital situation, it turned out that there were trade-offs. that wasn't the only thing the hospital was committed to. The hospital had to make profits. The hospital had to deal with unions. All of those kinds of factors were swirling around. And the hospital wasn't as free to take the recommendations. And my friends felt betrayed because they didn't have the autonomy that they thought they would. But I, not being that good a friend, I told them part of it was possibly their fault for not clarifying what the trade-offs might be and giving examples. If I propose this, how will it handle? How will your board handle it? And do that kind of calibration up front.
Okay, so you're saying they should have done a kind of pre-mortem-ish
they should have
assessment. Okay, that's really interesting. You are not a very good friend, I have to say.
I think they are under appreciating that harming patients is not actually a very good business proposition. I mean, no, I mean that seriously.
Don't mean to laugh.
It's actually expensive.
Yeah.
After the fact.
Yeah.
And reputationally and far more. So it's in everybody's interest. I think the problem is the way they're thinking about it is wrong. They're thinking about this as sort of one more thing that's expensive and effortful and so forth, when in fact it's about getting your culture of speaking up built, your people sort of on the same page, having thoughtful communications skills and strategies. I mean, there is a way to, as we talk about it in operations management, get your processes more in control and capable, so that we can be better able to do the right thing.
Okay,
more often.
Let me ask you this. Amy, you teach at HBS. The people who come to HBS are already successful, and now they're setting themselves up for bigger success. And by success, I mean organizational, but financial. And that is a big drive. That's a big reason why they're there. They want to be, phenomenally successful in a way that brings financial rewards. I'm not saying they're driven primarily by that. But let's take this last 5 minutes of conversation, including this letter from this former IOM guy. How would you deliver that message in a class? Because it is a trade-off, right? Or presumably.
I'm not sure it is.
Okay,
tell me. They used to think
about
they used to think about quality in manufacturing as a trade-off. Right, we can have quality, but it'll cost you extra.
Right, you can have it fast, you can have it good, but you can't have both.
But you can't have it both. Right. And then they learned, right, roughly in the 80s or so, that actually quality was free. Quality really meant getting your processes in control and capable. When you really figure out how to make something and make it well, it costs you less to do it. There's less rework, and the end result is better. And healthcare patient care has the added challenge of very high degree of customization and variability. So it's harder to do it, but that doesn't mean it can't be done.
Yeah. I just realized as we're sitting here that, Gary, you're kind of the master of looking at failure from before it happens. And Amy, you're the master of looking at it after. And so in our role playing, I represent failure, I guess.
Because you're over there.
I'm just dead in the center of you two.
Let me go back to, Gary very briefly mentioned the good catches, the near misses. And those are actually a real gold mine. Because when you can get people, especially in healthcare, but in aviation and so many other settings, when you get people are willing to talk about the near misses because those are sort of the good news, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes in healthcare, they sometimes call them good catches.
Yeah.
And people are, it's got a heroic feel, right? So they're happy to talk about the good catches, but they have the same exact attributes as the ones that we don't catch. So there's a lot of learning that can be done from those to improve the processes and prevent.
A lot of learning. There's data. So give me an example outside of healthcare or aviation. I'm just curious.
Okay. Of what?
Of an area where there's good data on near misses and where you can input that into your process.
You probably won't like this, but any manufacturing process.
Okay. Yeah.
Especially ones with high hazard conditions.
Yeah. Have you done a lot of work with those kind of organizations as well, manufacturing?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I've studied a lot of manufacturing organizations.
So, Gary, there was something you said in the series that resonated with me and a lot of people. It was one word, I think, I spoke with the two of you separately and a bunch of other people, but then the way we make the show is we'll cut the tape. We tell a story where we weave the tape in. So you'll often hear one person say something that is sort of responding to what someone else said. Although, just for the record, if there's anybody who still cares about journalism anymore, I don't know if there are, but it's really important to not deceive the reader or listener. We never will ask a question of one person and then use tape from someone else that wasn't answering that question. So I just want to make it clear. But sometimes we will edit together the tape in a way where it's kind of talking to a previous piece or a subsequent piece. But Gary, someone was talking about, and maybe it was you, Amy, I don't quite remember, about how failure should be celebrated in a certain way, because if you try to hide it, then a lot of bad things can happen. And then Gary says, well, here's the way I feel about failure. Failure should burn. And I remember in the moment you said it, I remember when I was in my studio, I heard that. I kind of felt a tingle. A lot of people felt that tingle when they were listening to it. So let me ask you, why? I would think, especially as psychologists, I can see the upside, but I can see a bigger downside. So tell me why the upside is bigger.
Okay, so I just know a lot of people who try to shrug off failure. Either they say, I'm going to embrace it, and so I won't fret about it, or I'll just think about other things, and they dismiss it. And it happens frequently, and they're happy to move on, and they don't learn much from the failure.
So you think in order to learn, it has to burn to some degree. I sounded like Oprah for a second there, didn't I?
I don't know that as a general issue. I haven't done the research. I just know how it works with me. And how it works with me, when I have a failure, it really hurts.
Yeah.
And if I'm giving a talk and I don't think I've done a good job, I come off the stage and I'm pretty miserable and I'm pretty discouraged and I might go a day or two feeling depressed, thinking, I don't ever want to go on stage again. I don't want to give any more talks. And then something will happen after a few days where I'll realize, here's how I should have said it. Here's what I could have done. And now I can't wait to get another chance.
So you recapture some optimism.
Right.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Let me ask you...
But one more thing.
Yeah.
But because the failure burns at me, I keep thinking about it. I don't dismiss it.
Yeah.
It takes a prominent place in my mind.
Now, Amy, I'm guessing you wouldn't really disagree with that, would you, or would you?
I wouldn't really disagree with it.
You
I think Gary's describing the motivation you have to get better.
Right. But let me ask you this. The burning part, to me, I guess whenever we're having these conversations, my mind keeps dividing them into personal and institutional. That may be wrong of me to do that, but it's the way my mind kind of works. So I'm curious, in an institutional failure that you're examining forensically, where do you stand on the burn part?
I don't think you need to do much burning institutionally because people are doing it for themselves. Right? They're feeling that they let their colleagues down, or they're feeling embarrassed, or they're feeling upset, and there's no need to pile on. In fact, I think the piling on inhibits the learning rather than motivating it in the way that Gary says.
I wanted to ask you both about an idea that comes out of the research of Roy Baumeister. I'm sure you guys both know Roy or know who he is. So he's a psychologist who's been around for a long time, and he's done a lot of different research across different ideas. But one kind of big package of his work has come to be called the power of bad, and it's this argument that humans are either built or conditioned or encouraged to receive negative news or information with a higher salience than positive, okay? This is why we get crushed into a Facebook vortex, right? This is why it works. That's his argument, at least. I'm curious to know if you agree with the notion that bad news is more powerful than good, essentially. How that intersects with the notion of failure, and if we acknowledge, if we think that's true and acknowledge it, if that can be, I hate to be such an optimist, but if it can be perhaps harnessed to understand. I'm not trying to be Pollyannish, but
do you really hate it?
I kind of do. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I try to avoid bad news, even news. Now I can't. I'm a journalist. I have to read the damn papers. But man, some days it's really hard. And so I want to know what you think might be the connection between that, if it is an evolutionary or natural condition, and how we think about failure.
Well, bad is stronger than good, right? So we pay more attention to it. It leaves a bigger mark. It has to have the same amount of badness will be far more powerful and memorable than an equivalent in goodness, for however that might work.
Yeah.
And I think that had an evolutionary advantage of some kind.
Do we believe what the evolutionary people say? Sorry, tangent.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Sometimes it makes sense, but on the other hand, it's like, think of all the things that we do that are not only 180 degrees different, 8 million degrees different than what we used to do on the savannah, right? Like, we don't, I was going to say divide ourselves into tribes and try to kill each other, but wait. We do.
Yeah.
All right, well, anyway, okay, we'll table that.
It has such a power over us to make us risk averse so that we don't eat the wrong thing or venture out after dark.
Yeah.
And so, you see an ambiguous lump over there in the rocks. Now that could just be a big boulder or it could be a big animal. You're better off assuming it's a big animal and running and hiding than blithely walking by and being wrong.
Yeah. So you're saying the evolutionary explanation has some power,
Right.
and theoretically sorry, you put it much better. It's the other, not the power of bad. Bad is stronger than good. That
Bad
was
is
the name of
stronger
one
than
paper,
good.
right?
Yep.
So I feel that's a good description. But how does that feed into what we're talking about? Because theoretically, it could be that, hey, maybe all my failures really weren't that bad. I carry more negative salience than I carry positive salience.
I think it makes them burn. And so then that leads us to be reluctant to have them, which can lead us to not take risks, which can lead us to stagnate and not innovate and not, make new friends or all the other things that are risky.
All the bad stuff that comes from trying to avoid other bad stuff.
Right.
Right. Yeah. The two of you are successful, right? You're academics, you're professionals, you dress well, you look very hygienic, all the good things. But I'm sure you failed at something. Can you each give me a failure? Could be personal, could be professional, could be from 20 years ago, could be from today. I'm curious. Gary, have you ever failed?
I definitely have failed. And the one that comes to mind that is hard to, I would like to repress it if I could. I had a company that I started in 1977, Klein Associates. We lasted 27 years, grew to 37 people. And then I sold it in 2005, and I sold it, and it worked out well for me financially. But I had great hopes. I sold it to a much larger company, and they were going to take what we did and showcase it and expand it and do wonderful things with it. And they were excited to acquire our capabilities in cognitive interviewing techniques and things like that. It was going to strengthen them. And when we announced it at their annual meeting, one of their senior advisors said, "This is the best acquisition this company has ever made."
Wow.
And it went downhill from there.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And it did not work out. And within 10 years, I think most of the people had left. And I think within 12 years, only one of the original 37 was still at the company. The division that they carved out, that they made us a separate division, had disappeared. It was a disaster.
Now, it's interesting because you said you were remunerated, right? You were
Yeah.
the owner, so you cashed out to some degree. I'm sure that helped a little bit assuage, or no?
The burn?
Yeah.
It helped a little bit, but I felt like a failure. And the fact that I got the payout also made me feel guilty that we hadn't delivered what they were expecting.
What did, so you had these employees, I'm sure some of them liked you a great deal. Maybe they all did. I'm sure they were loyal to some degree. How did you feel about their feelings about the failure?
I felt badly for them.
Yeah.
We found out that there were cultural mismatches that made them uncomfortable. And one of the things, our old company was small enough we were eligible for small business grants, and that disappeared when we were acquired by the larger company, but we knew that, and we expected that the larger company would fill in with projects they asked us to do, and we had young, energetic researchers, and they quickly got discouraged. Not only that, they left. Not only did they leave, they set up their own companies to become competitors of ours.
Right.
So this was like just a total disaster.
No, I'm sorry to hear that. That does sound like it would have burned. Yeah. Had you pre-mortemed the sale, the acquisition? Yeah.
We had, and frankly, I just wasn't smart enough to anticipate some of the mismatches that they were talking about, and that's an issue about learning from failure. Is you need a certain sophistication in your mental model to be able to identify some of these factors.
Had you sought out external consultants or advisors for you to figure out what the sale would really mean?
I did not seek out the ones that I needed.
Yeah.
No, that was a failure.
So that was a learning of yours.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Well, that's. I'm sad that it happened to you. That's. I find that story really instructive. I wish we'd had that in the series. Now I'm kind of ticked about that. Note to self: ask better questions in the interviews. Amy, what about you? Have you ever?
Well, I made a list, and then I ran out of time. The list got very long, and I was trying to choose among the failure stories, and I decided that this is probably the best one. I have 3 family members here, so I don't want to say some of the other ones that came up. But probably the best one was when I was a PhD student, and when you're the way you get out of a PhD program is you finish the PhD, and then you get a job as a faculty member. So I was really hoping to get a job as a faculty member. And so I put all my stuff together and I applied to the department that, of course, would be the top place to be. And I got rejected. I mean, I got just completely rejected. They said, not only do we not want to hire you, but we think we're going to hire more people this year than we've ever hired in the past. So, you're not even on the short list, right? And by the way, we think your work is boring, and we don't think you're ever going to amount to anything.
Wow.
So it felt pretty bad.
And that's how you ended up at Harvard then.
Yeah.
You got to go somewhere.
I got lucky because later on, just like a couple months go by, and it turns out that the operations management group at Harvard Business School is, and this is their terms, not mine, they're looking for a behavioral scientist who isn't afraid of technology. I can be that person.
Yeah.
And because they didn't really understand my work or my field, they didn't know I wasn't good. So they hired me.
So how did that failure burn at you?
Well, I felt quite hopeless for a while because it was in the fall. It was late fall of the year where by the end of that year you're supposed to have a job, and I went into a little bit of a tailspin of I'll never get a job, and so it felt terrible. But I started telling myself, you'll get a job. It might not be in academia, but someone will hire you.
So here's one problem with this topic and with this series that we made, honestly, is that just by the nature of how the world works, many of the people who want to and are good at talking about failure had failures on their way to success. And this is, we talked about in the series, and I talked about with both of you, Silicon Valley is a big fan of the fail fast, break things, but that's because this is a place where you just need 1 out of 50 successes, and it's, the 100x your money and everything's cool. So for the people who are here, who are listening to your story, and they say, well, wait, I didn't have a company to sell, or I didn't end up teaching at HBS. Just talk about the counterfactual. Let's say you'd never been hired. How do you advise that someone what do you do? What do you do when you've proven to yourself that something that you cared about and worked hard at, that you failed at?
Well, you have to take the time to figure out what went wrong, how you contributed to what went wrong, and make some changes. Make some pivots. But it is not a bug that people talk about the failure and then ultimately it leads to a success. That's a feature.
Yeah.
That is, in fact, the point, right, of this series, of this session. It is the fact that anything worth doing, anything really worth trying and succeeding at, will involve failures along the way.
Do you feel that is an old-fashioned sentiment that the younger people today don't quite buy?
That's such an easy question to say yes to.
I mean,
because of the way you asked it, but I agree. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Gary, what do you think?
I would go along with that as well.
You would, yeah, yeah. So among all the advantages of aging is that we have a better sense of how to incorporate, how to turn failure into success. Man, we old people are awesome.
We had less expectations of instant success, or instant.
Yeah. Plus, you had much less visibility into everyone else's momentary successes. Like, look at my boba. It's the best boba ever. So we didn't have that. Okay. So this concludes the first portion of our program. Amy and Gary are going to stay here, but I think we should acknowledge their excellence. Thank you. And what we'd like to do now is to hear from you. We, as you know, solicited some cards. We chose a few cards. We have a microphone for our guests here, and we'd like to bring up a few of you to hear your stories of failure, and we'll talk about them. By the way, does anybody have a question at this moment, since we're at a break here? Any kind of question about anything at all?
I do.
Yes, please.
This may not be the best question in the room.
Yeah.
It seems like in the startup. Hi, I'm David. I'm a startup entrepreneur and failing. But there's a.
Okay, this is the only room in Boston tonight where you could say that and get a round of applause.
There's a kind of a turn of phrase at HBS and other places, which is pivot, which is like if you're pursuing the wrong market or with the wrong product, the thing to do is to make a change. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how do you know it's the right time to pivot versus just having more tenacity?
This is the whole quit or grit business. Yeah. And let me just say briefly to that, it is a team sport, right? I don't think you can. It's judgment, right? Because you're talking about the future. That we don't have that perfect crystal ball, so we don't. We don't
if
know
you had
it.
made a company that made crystal balls, you'd still be doing
sell
great.
it for anything, right? So I think, given the inherent uncertainty, you have to. First of all, the question you're trying to ask is there sufficient evidence that my lack of success so far is based on things that additional work could help address? Right? Or is that just, I'm looking for a magic trick, in which case there won't be one, right? And then invite other people who have different perspectives, areas of expertise than you to help you think it through aloud.
It's a good answer. It's a hard problem.
It is.
Right?
It is a hard
Yeah,
problem.
the grit or quit, stick it out, or
because it's not a technical problem.
Right. I mean, I think everybody wants the
problem.
algorithm. You want the,
Right.
let me plug in my time, my money, my enthusiasm. Give me the answer. It's really hard. Yeah. Okay, let's have some of you come up and tell your stories of deep, dark failure. First, please welcome, it looks like Liz Lieblich, perhaps. Liz? Hi. Is it actually Lieblich?
It's Lieblich.
Liz Lieblich.
Liz Lieblich.
The record stands corrected.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Liz, what have you failed at?
Where to start? I think one of my biggest failures, regrets, is that I never had the sense that it was okay to fail when I was in my 20s. I was scared to death of being alone, of not being successful, of failing. And I think that fear of failure itself is so destructive. But I also think that to be raised in a community and in a family that can give you the confidence that you can know that it's okay to feel is magical, right? Not all of us have had people that tell us, hey, try and it's okay if it doesn't work out.
Did you have that kind of community?
I think my parents, who are wonderful, had very high expectations. And I think that I never felt as though I could sort of meet their expectations. And so I always had this very anxious way about me because I was always thinking I'm doing something wrong. I'm not doing the right thing the right way. And that's just kind of ridiculous because the way that you do something is the right way if it's the way that you believe. And I think that failure in and of itself is a gift, but the bigger gift is to have people say it's okay to fail. And not all of us have that. right? Like we're not always taught that we have a backup plan, or that, left and right. It doesn't matter. You do what you want to do. You try what you want to try, and if you don't get to the end that you think you should, if the failure is the end, that's okay too.
Can you give an example? When you said that the things you didn't try because you were scared of failing, can you give an example?
One really basic one is I never wanted to leave. I never wanted to travel. I traveled all the time when I was a young girl with my family, but as a young adult, I was too scared to leave my community. I was too scared that I would do something wrong or that I would miss an opportunity. So I had chances to go abroad, and I just didn't. And that's just a really small one, but I was scared of something not going right, and it.
This reminds me of the advice or the fear. I mean, here's one of the fears that I think is most irrational, just me personally, the fear of eating alone in a restaurant. A lot of people won't do it. And I happen to be here today in Boston eating alone in a restaurant. And I was the only person alone. And I usually don't really give much of a blank about anything. But you realize, like, there are social constructs. And when you're out of step with them, then you hit the spotlight effect, right? What psychologists call a spotlight. You think people are looking at you. They don't care about us, right? So I am curious, can you give an example of something you have done or do today that you feel is contra the way you were scared? Okay, let's have it.
I absolutely do. So one of the pieces of advice that I always give my children, my daughter, is that no one gives a shit about you. They are so concerned.
Is that what she says, daughter?
Yeah, I do say that. And it's so true, right? Like, they just think I'm glad that's not me, basically. So one of the things that I did, I guess when I was in my mid-40s, is I decided to try skiing. And I bought passes to Neshoba Valley, and I just skied by myself. And I kind of looked like an idiot. It's not really even a bunny hill. It's just kind of like an incline. And I was scared to death. And I was like, screw it. Like, nobody here knows me. Actually, someone here probably does, but it's okay. Because, like, this is for me. And if I look like an idiot, if I can't get off the lift chair, what's the worst that's going to happen?
And are you now an Olympian or something?
I love to ski, but I'm terrible at it.
Okay, that's awesome, though.
So,
anyway, yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Gary and Amy, do you think like a good piece of practical universal advice would be just give fewer shits generally?
Yeah, I think so.
Gary, you agree?
I mean, certainly we don't want people to be impervious to other reactions. Other reactions can be very helpful. So there is a bit of that, but it's nice and liberating to say, what am I enjoying about it, and just focus on what could be pleasurable about it. And by the way, when I go to restaurants, I'm happy to eat by myself because I bring a magazine or a book. It's a good quiet time.
Yeah. Amy, are you good at eating alone?
It's so much easier than it used to be now that we have these newspapers in our pocket at all times. But I think that the real insight there is take more risks. And if skiing kind of looks like fun, you will be terrible at it at the beginning. That's just a fact. So you got to get through that, and that's a metaphor for all of the other things, all of the other risks that are hard to take.
It also speaks to the fact, to me at least, that, again, in a world where there's so much communication and evidence of other people's behaviors, we usually see the people who are really good at the stuff that we might want to do. Like, I happen to play golf. I took up golf late in life. I love it. I've gotten okay. I'm never going to be great. But when you watch PGA Tour players, you think, oh, that's what you do. It's like, that's not what I do.
It looks so easy, doesn't it?
It looks so easy, but also they just like every shot is pretty, like their worst shots are still pretty good. And so I feel like if you have a mental model or an actual visual model in business, in healthcare, in anything, in friendship, in relationships, if the only marriage you know of or that you've seen is one that's lasted 50 years and it's perfect, that can be intimidating to people. So how do you try to recalibrate expectations, I guess?
I mean, I think you have to remind yourself that you are seeing a partial view, not the full view of other people's perfect lives.
But
or
you as a
perfect sports.
psychologist especially knows
Yeah.
how hard that is
Right.
because even if it's totally anomalous, we make it normative, right? We make it the norm. How do you break that?
I think it's a new habit, right? Stop, challenge, choose. Stop, remind yourself, the way I'm thinking about this is incomplete. And then choose a healthier, more productive way to think about it.
Man.
I think there's also a problem. People tend to identify a perfect path that they're supposed to take. And if they feel that they're deviating from that path, then something bad is happening. And that's risky. Should I go on this path because I'm not sure I see what the end is going to look like? And that's a different mindset than, I'm not sure where this path is going to lead. We'll find out.
Right.
And make it into an adventure rather than into this fear-driven perfection trap that we fall into.
That's a great point. It reminds me, Amy, uncertainty is one of the causes on your spectrum, but I also think of uncertainty as just a state of being that most people are very uncomfortable with. Do you know, is there good scientific evidence of how we can each make ourselves a little bit less frightened by the notion of uncertainty?
I think we have to remind ourselves that it's just a fact, right? So we're vulnerable to that reality, and then choose to think about it in a more productive way.
I have a friend who's a professional gambler, mostly poker, but some backgammon too. And he argues that we've had gambling all wrong in this country for a long time, that rather than thinking of it as a vice that should be kept away from people, that it should be, embraced by everyone. And obviously now legalized sports gambling is happening everywhere. But his argument is that gambling is one of the few places where anybody can and will engage in probabilistic thinking, right?
And that's healthy.
Very healthy,
right.
But we don't do it very much,
As long as you take the money out of it, and then it would be great. Like people could just go gamble for,
Right. That's what elections are, I believe.
Yeah.
Right? We say, oh, my guy. Okay.
But I also...
except for the taking the money out part.
Well, they spend the money, but we don't, right? We get free bets.
I also wonder if there's a skill there, because a friend of mine, John Schmidt, who's a former Marine, works with young Marines, training them in decision-making on tactical decision games. And he'll give them a game, and not all the information is available, and they'll start to complain, how can I make a decision? I don't know this, I don't know that. And he'll say, tough luck.
Yeah.
And they become very uncomfortable in the first session or two. And after a while, they get used to it.
Interesting.
And after a while, they see that's part of the challenge, is to proceed despite the
Excellent.
uncertainty.
So we can train ourselves to thinking that through.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. Has anybody read the Michael Lewis book, Going Infinite, about Sam Bankman-Fried?
Not yet.
Because, one thing that Sam was really, really, really good at was operating under uncertainty, like games and then markets. Now, it didn't end very well, I think we should say. So maybe, but I still like the advice. I mean, right, it's a muscle to some degree, yeah. We have a failure story from one Eve Sullivan. Can we have Eve approach? Hi, Eve. Hi. Nice to meet you, Eve. I have to say, as you approached, the look on your face was slightly less enthusiastic than I thought that maybe. You feel good about this still?
I have a major case of cotton mouth.
Oh, do you want to? I got rid of all my communicable diseases recently. You can hang.
Where did you put them?
Ask Gary. Okay.
Well, my failure story was as a parent. Any parents in the audience? Yes, at least
Yes.
one.
Yes.
Was when I bought a small cutting board with the intent that I would use it to whack my kids.
Oh, yeah.
That's pretty awful, isn't it? I mean,
Was it plastic or wood?
oh, it was wood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I wrote
sure
on
it
the little
matters.
card that your lovely Lyric enjoined us to fill out.
By the way, lovely Lyric. Lyric is also the name of a real person, Lyric Bowditch, who is over in the corner
Yes,
there.
yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you,
I was
Lyric.
saying that
referred
she is
to.
lovely
Yeah.
Lyric. And I wrote on the card that I remember doing that, and I don't remember using it, but the kids might. But the point
Wait a
is,
minute. Does that mean you did use it and you don't remember? the using thereof, or you don't know
Probably.
if you used it?
One or the other.
That's a big difference. That's like, it's raining or it's not raining.
No, I made mistakes as a parent. Okay.
Are any of your children here tonight?
No, they're not.
Okay. Are they in penitentiary or?
Nobody died. Nobody got arrested, and they're all sober.
But
so
wait,
it's
you're saying
okay.
that you regret. You're saying that one of your big failures was the purchase. The cutting board, with which you may or may not have actually.
No, the point. I mean, I did hit my kids. That was right. But it's. I mean, 51As and all the rest. But I got help. The point is, I got a lot of help with my parenting. I made some positive changes. I even found it. I am a parenting educator.
Wow.
Late in life.
A lot of changes.
And the program I founded is recognized by the UN, so it must be okay.
Wow. What's it called?
Parents Forum.
Okay. You sound unenthusiastic about that title.
What I'm enthusiastic about is being able to say Parents Forum on the air for people here, because the program needs to be passed on to people with different ideas and different prospects, because I'm done, right? I mean,
Now, I'm curious, as part of the leadership of this group, do you lead with, like, let me tell you about what kind of parent I was a while ago, and let me tell you about this cutting board? In other words, is this cutting board story part of your parent leadership repertoire?
No, but I think one of the things that makes for an effective parenting educator, well, like any teacher, is you share the things that didn't go well. And that gives other people listening to you permission to say, oh, golly, I did that and it really didn't go well. I think I'm going to do something different. Do you have any suggestions? And Parents Forum is a peer support program that allows people to help each other.
I love this point of connecting, sharing stories of failure with teaching. Do you think that is as important a component of teaching education generally as it ought to be?
I think it has great value.
Yeah. Do you think it's taken advantage enough?
Probably not. Can I tell you a story?
Yeah.
This is a person in the petrochemical industry who's been working for 40 years as a trainer. And he said when he started training, he waited for people who he was training to make a mistake, and then he could whack them. Not with a cutting board, but he could just slam them for making the mistake, because that's how he'd been trained.
Wow.
And so that's the way he did the training.
Yeah.
And he noticed after 5 or 7 years, wasn't getting very far. And he gradually stopped doing that. And now when people make a mistake, he becomes curious and becomes a dialogue with them. Gee, you're a smart person. How did you make this mistake? Let's think about it. So he had a 180-degree reversal from the beginning of his career to where he is now.
Fantastic. Yeah. You may have gone 181, although that just becomes 179. Then.
Well, Parents Forum is based on questions. It's not didactic. It's not do this, don't do that. It's what's working for you and what's working for me.
Yeah.
So
Excellent. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Really nice to meet you. Thank you. Okay, don't tell New York this, but this audience is much better than the audience in New York. Okay. We have time for one more audience failure story. Dan Newman. Dan, are you still up for it? There he goes. Oh, yeah, he's sitting in the second row. He's up for it. All right, Dan, nice to meet you. Are you a Bostoner? What do you call yourselves? Bostonite?
Bostonians.
Bostonians. I knew that.
New Englander.
Yeah, okay. Are those tigers you're wearing?
Yes,
Yeah.
Onitsuka Tigers. I use them for workouts.
I love that
too.
you just took the mic right off. You're
Well, part of my profession is doing learning and development and workshops, so this is a place we spend a lot of time in the arena.
Yeah. So what have you failed at lately?
So, a lot of things lately, but the thing I wrote down on the card is that during the pandemic, I kind of became an amateur failurologist. You call it?
Wow.
Where my friend, who is organizational psychologist, and I interviewed people about their failures and started a podcast about it. And so when you did the failure series, I'm like, wow, they copied some good artists here.
What's your podcast called?
Well, here's the failure. It was called. It was called The 2020 Perspective, and I looked it up online, and our last episode was published 2 years and 5 days ago. So the failure was continuing the podcast.
Okay, let's talk about that. What was it that kept you? Were you enjoying it, for instance?
Yes.
Did you have an audience? People were finding it?
Enough, I guess, at the time. I mean, we started it during the pandemic, so, there was people who didn't have a lot to do, but when things started being able to do, we felt like we weren't gaining an audience.
And it was called the 2020 Perspective, you
Yes,
think?
yes.
Do you think the failure might be attributed to your naming it for a particular year, and then once that year is over, it maybe feels a little Edsel-y?
Ironically, when we first came up with the idea, it was 2020. And then moving forward, we were like, well, Vision's either getting worse or it's getting better. I don't know. But it was a very nourishing activity, especially during the pandemic, getting to interview people about their individual stories of failure.
Okay, but here's what confuses me. This was a project of your own design and making. So was it that you failed, or you just decided it was too much work?
Aren't they the same in some ways?
Oh.
In some ways. And I thought a lot about it as when I saw that this listing was going to be here in my hometown after a failure series. It felt kind of poetic. And I thought a lot about it, and I thought about the narrative of failure. And I think failure as a narrative is a really important part of understanding whether the failure was a failure or a give up or a grit or a circumstantial failure. And when you were even here on stage saying like, oh, I'm between the past and the future, I was like, no, you're not the failure. You're the narrative tying it together. So I don't know if that's pretty or not, but I think that's cute.
I like it. I can see why you'd be a very good podcaster, I have to say. So Gary and Amy, what do you think of that as a failure? That sounds like a, I don't know. Would you consider that a failure for yourselves? Gary's giving me the big no.
Not particularly. It sounds like a pivot.
Oh.
Which is another word for failure.
Well, what do you do now, though? You're gainfully somethinged.
I like to entertain that idea. Well, I'm an entrepreneur, so trade in failure. I'd say I've got 4 failed businesses right now. But I also work with a startup-focused organization, so that is also embedded in the failure world. And when I mentioned to my former podcast host that I was coming to this tonight, she said, you might as well ask, because the worst thing that happens, it says no, is would you ever consider taking a 4-episode series and turning it into its own spin-off show?
Yeah, no. But,
you don't find out unless you ask.
If you've lived through the worst
I
that could happen,
have.
so it's only going to get better from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was fun. This was really fun. I know I've already gone long. This is what I do, so we can't go much longer, so we have to wrap up in a minute. I thank you so much. This was really, you guys were fantastic, and the audience was just fantastic, so thank you very much. I did ask, hold your applause, please. That's what they say at the Oscars when there's 8 producers. I thought how we might end is I asked Amy and Gary to think about this event tonight, live in Boston, and pre-mortem it, to go through Gary's pre-mortem of looking into the crystal ball and saying, oh my gosh, it's really gone poorly. What would have been the reasons for it to go poorly? Okay? Now, you may have your own thoughts. Hopefully you didn't think it went so poorly. I think it was okay. But it's not for me to say. It's for you to say. But Gary, when you sat down to pre-mortem this event tonight, if it had gone very poorly, how would it have done so?
Okay. All right, so I started with the ridiculous.
Okay.
And had protesters storm the stage and disrupt the proceedings.
Okay. Not yet.
Not yet. That could happen. Or one of the principals tests positive for COVID.
Okay.
But then I got more into it because those are kind of flippant. The conversation rehashes material from the 4 podcasts.
Yeah.
And I don't think that happened. I think we brought up some new topics, but if it had just rehashed what was in the podcast, I thought that would have been disappointing.
I don't think I think we freshly hashed. Because it was, I mean, it wasn't like we didn't talk about it, but it was, it was a different dimension.
And then Amy and Gary are too polite and don't challenge each other. Or Gary and Amy are too confrontive and create an uncomfortable environment.
Those are good.
You are good at this.
And then we all play it safe and no one learns anything new.
Okay. All right. Well, it will be up to you to decide whether any of Gary's pre-mortem fears came true to some degree. I think we could argue that some of them, maybe we could have been more confrontational. We could have been less. But that was fantastic, Gary. You're pretty good at this, I guess. Yeah. Amy?
I have 2 very different ones, from each other. The first one is that as academics, we're long-winded, vague, boring, and go on and on and on and never stop.
Your words, not mine.
Yep, exactly. And the other one involved a blue bike and my riding the blue bike over here and then ending up in a bike accident and never making it. So I decided not to ride the blue bike.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so Gary, that's a very useful pre-mortem idea, yes? Where she identified something that was a real...
Real possibility,
fear and avoided it, yeah. Okay, so...
A risk, not a fear,
was
but
that
a
it,
risk.
just the 2?
Just the 2.
So neither of those happened. We could agree, yeah.
Well, maybe. The second one didn't happen, for sure.
You think the first one happened?
No. Okay, they said no.
I don't think the first one happened. I myself have 3. My first one was that, even before COVID happened, I worked remotely. I just like working on my own. I became a writer because I don't like people that much, okay? It's not that I don't like people. I just really enjoy spending time thinking, writing, da-da-da. So even before COVID, I worked remotely. And then with COVID, I haven't been out a lot. And now it's just now starting to happen. But I kind of thought that I wouldn't be able to adjust to being out and that I might just start drooling or maybe just randomly lie down and take a nap, which is what I do when I work at home. So I didn't do any of that. Okay, that was number 1. Number 2 is kind of related to number 1, which is being unaccustomed to being with people so much. And so I'm a New Yorker, and we are either environmentally or maybe genetically conditioned to kind of hate Boston. You know, and it's mostly a sports rivalry, and I'm not even a Yankees fan, but it's just like when the word comes up, Boston in New York, people like spit on the ground. It's just a thing. And I don't feel that way. I actually really love Boston, but I felt that somehow because I haven't been out, it might just like come through and that I might say something terrible about Boston. I don't think I did. I may have blacked out though. If I did. Oh, and number 3 is I knew that I really liked Amy. I like her mind. I like how she expresses things. I like her career. I like what she's done and her book. So I knew that. I liked Gary. I loved the pre-mortem idea. I enjoyed speaking with him and so on. But you know, there are like 2 foods you like both of them, but then you make the mistake of putting them together and they're not so good. I was a little bit worried that it might be like a peanut butter and pickle situation. And so I'm really grateful that it turned out so well. Who's the pickle? Who's the peanut butter? Yeah. I'm grateful that it turned out so well. I'm grateful to both of you for coming. I'm extremely grateful to all of you for showing up and to WBUR. And so with that, I say good night, and I say take good care of yourself, and if you can, someone else too. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Phone. Hello, hello. No, not happening. Hello, hello. Hi, great job. Check, check. Nothing. Okay, we'll let it go. I can try.
Announcement?
Taking a picture? Yes. Okay, let's do it.